The delicate rim of the porcelain teacup was a cool, smooth anchor in a world of shimmering silk and too loud laughter. Avery held it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. It was her sister's wedding, a spectacle of white roses and champagne fountains that felt a universe away from her own quiet life. She had found refuge in a small, antique-filled sitting room off the main ballroom, a pocket of blessed silence. She was not alone for long. An older woman, draped in a gown the color of deep burgundy wine, settled into a velvet armchair opposite her. Her face was a masterclass in controlled elegance, but her eyes, dark and sharp, held a flicker of something unsettled. The woman's gaze swept the room, then landed on Avery. It was an assessing look, swift and surprisingly intimate. She leaned forward, the scent of expensive perfume, something with notes of amber and old secrets, preceding her. Her voice was a low whisper, a silken command that slid directly into Avery's ear. "I need you to do something for me. When my son enters this room, you will stand, and you will greet him as if he is your fiancé." Avery's breath hitched. The teacup trembled in her hands. This had to be a joke, a strange party game for the obscenely wealthy. Before she could form a question, before she could even laugh in disbelief, the heavy oak door swung open. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. The noise of the party behind him died away, sucked into the vacuum of his presence. He did not move, but the room tilted on its axis, suddenly his. His gaze found the older woman, his mother, and then slid to Avery. It was not a curious glance. It was an inventory. Avery's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not a game. The stillness of the man in the doorway was the stillness of a predator. The look in his mother's eyes was not playful. It was desperate. Avery understood, in a sudden, cold flash, that to refuse was not an option. This was a world she had stumbled into by accident, and the rules were not her own. She was no longer just a guest at her sister's wedding. She was a piece on a board she did not understand, and she had just been moved. Slowly, Avery placed the teacup on its saucer. The quiet click was the only sound in the room. Her legs felt unsteady as she rose, the fabric of her bridesmaid dress whispering against the chair. The man's eyes, a shade of brown so dark they were almost black, followed the movement. They held no warmth, only a waiting intelligence. The older woman, Isabella, also stood, her posture radiating a sudden, brittle confidence. "Dante," she said, her voice smooth as cream now, all trace of her earlier desperation gone. "There you are. I was just telling Amelia about our trip to the coast last spring." Amelia. The name hung in the air, foreign and heavy. Avery felt a disorienting split, her own identity peeling away to make room for this new, fictional person. She was Avery, a 21-year-old art history student. But in this room, she was Amelia, the fiancée of the man whose stare was a physical weight. Dante's gaze shifted back to her, and for a half-second, she saw a flicker of something. It was not confusion. It was calculation. He was processing the scene, his mother's words, Avery's presence, and assembling them into a picture she could not yet see. He moved into the room, and the space seemed to shrink around him. He did not walk so much as flow, a deliberate, silent predator. He stopped before his mother and brushed a kiss against her cheek, a gesture of affection that was entirely devoid of warmth. It was a ritual, a performance. His eyes never left Avery. "Amelia," he said. The name was a flat statement from his lips, not a question. He held out a hand. It was a large hand, clean, with clipped nails. A heavy gold ring, carved with some kind of crest, sat on his little finger. It was the only ornament he wore, and it looked less like jewelry and more like a weapon. Avery's own hand felt small and cold as she placed it in his. His grip was firm, his skin unexpectedly warm. The contact sent a jolt up her arm, a current of pure, undiluted danger. This was not a handshake. It was an acquisition. "Dante," she managed, her voice a reedy imitation of the confident woman she was supposed to be. "It's good to see you. My mother has been monopolizing you," he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. The gesture was meant to look possessive, intimate. To Avery it felt like a brand. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." His words were for her, but his eyes were scanning the room, the doorway, the space beyond. He was hunting. Isabella smiled, a brilliant, false thing. "Nonsense. We were just having a quiet moment before rejoining the party." She looked at Avery, her eyes conveying a clear, sharp message. "Play along. Your life may depend on it. There is someone I believe wants to offer his congratulations. A business associate of your father's. Marco Rinaldi." At the name, something in Dante's posture shifted. It was an infinitesimal change, a tightening of the muscles in his jaw, a new level of stillness in his shoulders. It was the most expressive thing she had seen him do. He turned his head slightly, his gaze fixed on the crowded ballroom visible through the door. "Is he here now?" "He was asking after you," Isabella said, her voice light, but her hand found Avery's arm, her fingers gripping with surprising strength. "He was asking if you had anyone, family, attachments." And in that moment Avery understood. She was not a person. She was a shield, a hastily constructed lie to protect this man from an unseen threat. She was a fabrication, a ghost named Emilia, conjured to stand between Dante Vescovi and a man named Marco Rinaldi. The warmth of Dante's hand around hers suddenly felt like the cold steel of a closing trap. She had walked into this room for a cup of tea, a moment of peace. Now, she was an unwilling player in a deadly game, and she had just been handed her script. The transition from the quiet sitting room back to the roaring celebration was jarring. Dante's hand was a firm, inescapable pressure at the small of her back, guiding her through the throngs of laughing, dancing guests. No one paid them any mind, lost in their own champagne-fueled joy. To the outside world, they were just another couple. To Avery, every step felt like a march deeper into enemy territory. His touch was not comforting. It was a constant reminder of her role, of the invisible chain that now linked her to him. She could feel the heat of his palm through the thin silk of her dress, a possessive warmth that made her skin prickle. They stopped near the edge of the dance floor, and he leaned in close, his voice a low murmur against her ear. The scent of him was clean and sharp, cedar and something else she could not name, something metallic and cold like steel. "Smile," he commanded softly. "You look like you're walking to your execution." She forced her lips into a shape that might pass for a smile. "It feels a little like that," she whispered back, not looking at him. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face that matched the name Marco Rinaldi. She did not know what she was looking for, but a primal instinct told her she would recognize the threat when she saw it. "My mother is a formidable woman," Dante said, his tone unreadable. "But she can be impulsive. Forgive her theatrics, it was not an apology. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of the absurdity of their situation without offering any release from it." "What does this man Marco want?" Avery asked, her voice barely audible over the music. Dante's fingers tightened fractionally at her back. "He wants to know my weaknesses. In our world, attachments are weaknesses. A wife, a child, a fiancé. They are leverage." The casual way he said it sent a chill down her spine. The word leverage hung in the air between them, ugly and sharp. She was leverage, a walking, breathing vulnerability he had not asked for but was now forced to protect. Or perhaps, she thought with a sudden, sickening lurch, she was not something to be protected. Perhaps she was something to be sacrificed. Before she could process the thought, a man approached them. He was handsome in a way that felt polished to a dangerous sheen, with silvering hair at his temples and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore his expensive suit with a practiced ease, but there was a restlessness in his movements, a predatory grace that set Avery's teeth on edge. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Dante," the man said, his voice smooth as honey, "I almost did not recognize you. It has been too long."
Marco Dante replied.
His own voice was flat, devoid of any feigned warmth. He did not extend a hand. His body was a wall between this man and Avery. I heard you were in town. Marco's gaze slid past Dante, landing on Avery with an unnerving focus. It felt like being catalogued, assessed. And you have been keeping secrets, he said, his smile widening. He looked directly at Avery. You must be the mysterious Amelia. Your mother has been singing your praises. I am Marco Rinaldi. It is a pleasure to finally meet the woman who has captured the heart of Dante Vescovi. Every word was a loaded weapon. Avery felt Dante go perfectly still beside her. This was it, the test. Her throat was dry, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She met Marco's gaze, forcing a polite, placid smile onto her face. She was an actress in the most important role of her life. Mr. Rinaldi, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Dante has told me so much about you. It was a lie, a simple, elegant lie, but it was all she had. It was a claim. Positioned her inside Dante's world, not outside it. Marco's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected her to be shy, intimidated. He had not expected her to meet his gaze and lie so calmly to his face. Dante's hand moved from her back to her waist, his fingers splaying possessively over her hip. It was a clear, unmistakable signal to the other man.
Mine.
The air crackled with unspoken violence, a silent war being waged over champagne and string music. Avery felt trapped in the crossfire, a pawn in a battle between kings. The conversation with Marco Rinaldi lasted only a few minutes, but it stretched into an eternity. Every question he asked was a probe, a delicate instrument searching for a crack in their story. He asked where they had met, how long they had known each other, what their plans were for the future. Dante answered with curt, dismissive replies, his boredom a carefully constructed shield. It was Avery who surprised herself. She found a strange, cold calm settling over her. She invented a story, a plausible fiction about meeting through a university art program, a shared love for 16th-century Italian painters. The details flowed out of her, specific and believable. She could feel Dante's surprise, a subtle shift in the way he stood beside her. He had expected a liability. He had not expected a co-conspirator. When Marco finally excused himself, melting back into the crowd, the tension did not dissipate. Coiled tighter, Dante's hand remained at her waist, a heavy, grounding weight. Where did you learn to lie like that? He asked, his voice a low rumble near her ear. I'm an art history student, she said, her voice trembling slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. My entire education is about understanding context, provenance, and forgery. You learn to spot a fake by understanding how a real one is made. The analogy was more apt than she intended. She was a forgery, and her survival depended on her authenticity. He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes scanning her face as if seeing her for the first time. The music swelled, and her sister, Chloe, radiant in her wedding gown, laughed from across the room, oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding just a few feet away. The sight of her sister's happiness was a painful reminder of the normal life Avery had lost the moment she sat down for a cup of tea. This is not over, Dante said, his voice flat and final. He will not be satisfied with this. He will have people watch you. He will dig. I'll just go home, Avery said, a note of pleading in her voice. After the wedding, I'll leave. He'll see that it was all a lie. Dante's grip on her waist tightened, not painfully, but with an absolute authority that stole the air from her lungs. No, he said, you will do no such thing. He saw you. He spoke to you. To him, you are now a part of this. If you disappear, he will not assume it was a lie. He will assume I am hiding you, or worse, that you are a weakness he can exploit. He will find you, and he will use you to get to me. The story my mother started, we now have to finish. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. This was not a one-night charade. It was not a temporary shield. It had become a cage. "What are you saying?" she whispered, the noise of the party fading to a dull roar in her ears. "I am saying," he said, turning her to face him, his eyes locking onto hers, "that you will not be going home tonight. You will not be going back to your apartment or your classes. Until Marco Rinaldi is no longer a threat, your life as Avery is over. You are Amelia, my fiancée, and you will be with me at all times. You are under my protection now." The word protection sounded like a death sentence. It was not a promise of safety. It was a declaration of ownership. He was not saving her from the danger. He was absorbing her into it. She looked past his shoulder at her smiling family, at the life that was suddenly behind a wall of unbreakable glass. She had thought this was a mistake, an accident. But it was not. It was a door she had walked through, and Dante Vescovi had just locked it behind her. Leaving the wedding was a surreal experience. Avery said her goodbyes in a daze, hugging her sister and parents while Dante stood a few feet away, a silent, dark sentinel. His presence was a stark contrast to the joyful chaos of the reception's end. To her family, he was simply Amelia's mysterious, handsome fiancé, a man of few words. Chloe had winked at her, whispering, "He's intense." "I like him." Avery had managed a weak smile, the lie a bitter taste in her mouth. She felt a profound, aching grief for the simplicity of her life just a few hours prior. The moment they were outside, the cool night air did nothing to clear her head. A black sedan, so polished it reflected the city lights like liquid obsidian, pulled up to the curb. A man in a dark suit got out of the driver's seat and opened the rear door without a word. Dante's hand was back at her waist, guiding her in. The interior was all black leather and silence. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, shutting out the sounds of the city, of her old life. They drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The car moved through the streets of New York with an unnerving smoothness, a predator gliding through its hunting grounds. Avery stared out the window, watching the familiar city lights blur into streaks of gold and white. She did not know where they were going. She did not dare to ask. She was a passenger, a captive, and the man beside her was the embodiment of the cage she was now in. Finally, the car descended into a private underground garage. The gate rolled shut behind them with a low groan, another layer of separation from the outside world. They rode an elevator in silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the machinery. It opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a statement of power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering city skyline. The space was vast, minimalist, and cold, decorated in shades of gray, black, and chrome. There was not a single personal touch, not a photograph, not a misplaced book. It was the home of a man who did not live so much as operate. Avery stood awkwardly in the center of the massive living room, her bridesmaid dress feeling flimsy and absurd in this stark, masculine space. Dante shrugged off his suit jacket, tossing it onto a chair with a careless grace. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in the faint, intricate lines of old tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. "There are clothes for you in the guest room," he said, his back to her as he walked to a wet bar built into the wall. "My mother arranged it." Of course she had. Isabella Vescovi, the grand architect of this entire nightmare. She had not just impulsively chosen Avery. She had planned for it. The realization was chilling. "How long?" Avery asked, her voice small in the cavernous room. "How long do I have to stay here?" Dante poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He did not pour one for her. He turned, leaning back against the bar, and took a slow sip, his eyes watching her over the rim of the glass. The look was appraising, cold. "As long as it takes," he said simply. "And what does that mean?" she pressed, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. "What does 'as long as it takes' mean?" "It means until Marco Rinaldi is no longer a problem." He set the glass down with a quiet click. "Marco is a man who deals in absolutes. He is either a threat or he is gone. There is no in-between." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. Gone did not mean on vacation. Avery wrapped her arms around herself, a sudden chill racking her body despite the room's warmth. She was trapped in this man's world, a world where people were made to disappear. She thought of her classes, her part-time job at the university library, her tiny apartment with its wilting houseplants. It all seemed like a story from someone else's life. She felt a wave of dizziness, the stress and unreality of the night crashing down on her. Her vision swam, the city lights outside blurring into a dizzying smear. She swayed on her feet, reaching out a hand to steady herself on the back of a leather sofa. Dante was across the room in 2 silent strides. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. "Breathe," he said, his voice a low command. It was not gentle, but it was not unkind either. It was direct, practical. He then turned and walked back to the bar, returning with a glass of water. He pressed it into her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was brief, impersonal, but it was the first thing he had done that was not about control or possession. It was a simple, human gesture. For a moment, he was not just a monster. He was a man, offering a glass of water to a woman in distress. It was a small crack in the frozen facade, a hint of something more complex beneath the surface. And that, she realized with a fresh wave of fear, was far more dangerous than the monster. The guest room was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, but it was a sanctuary. It had its own bathroom, and the closet was, as Dante had said, filled with clothes. Simple, elegant pieces in neutral colors. Silk blouses, tailored trousers, cashmere sweaters. All in her size. Isabella's efficiency was terrifying. Avery stripped off the bridesmaid dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor like a shed skin of her former self. She took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away the feel of Dante's hand on her skin, the scent of Marco's cloying cologne, the entire surreal night. It was useless. The fear was lodged deep in her bones. She slept fitfully, waking several times to the unfamiliar silence of the penthouse, the distant, muted hum of the city far below. When morning came, she found Dante in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee and reading something on a tablet. He was already dressed in a dark gray suit, looking as if he had been awake for hours. He did not look up when she entered. "There's coffee," he said, gesturing with his head towards the machine. Avery poured herself a cup, her hands shaking slightly. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. She was a prisoner in this gilded cage, and he was her warden. The domesticity of the scene, sharing a kitchen, making coffee, was a grotesque parody of the life she was supposed to be pretending to live with him. "I need to call my family," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They'll be worried. I was supposed to help them clean up after the wedding brunch today." He finally looked up from his tablet, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You will call them," he said. "You will tell them that you and I have decided to take a spontaneous trip, a celebration of our engagement. You will tell them you don't know when you'll be back. You will sound happy." It was an order, not a suggestion. "And if I don't?" she challenged, a sliver of her old self rising to the surface. His expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Then you will put them in danger. Marco's people will be watching your family, your friends, your apartment. Any deviation from the story we have created will be seen as a weakness. They will follow the loose thread, and it will lead them to your sister, your parents. Do you want that?" No. The word was a silent scream in her mind. He was using her family against her, wielding her love for them like a weapon. It was cruel. It was effective. She nodded, her defiance crumbling into dust. She made the call, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of a young woman giddy with love and excitement. She could hear the smile in her mother's voice, the genuine happiness for her. Every word was a fresh betrayal, another lie cementing her place in Dante's world. When she hung up, she felt hollowed out. Later that day, Isabella Vescovi arrived. She swept into the penthouse like a visiting monarch, her eyes immediately finding Avery. "Amelia, my dear," she said, kissing the air on both sides of Avery's face. "I see my son is taking good care of you," she turned to Dante. "We need to talk." Dante led his mother into a room he used as an office, closing the heavy door behind them. Avery was left alone in the vast living room, the city skyline her only companion. She could not hear their words, only the low, angry murmur of Dante's voice and the sharp, cutting cadence of his mother's replies. The argument went on for nearly an hour. When they emerged, there was a fragile truce in the air. Isabella looked shaken, a rare crack in her porcelain composure. Dante's face was like stone. Isabella approached Avery, her expression a strange mix of regret and steely resolve. "I have put you in a difficult position," she said, her voice low. "I acted to protect my son. It is all I have ever done." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Dante's father, he was killed. It was a car bomb. It was meant for Dante. He was 17. He was supposed to be in the car with his father that morning, but they had argued. Dante refused to go." The story landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Avery looked at Dante, who stood by the window, his back to them, a rigid silhouette against the afternoon light. She could suddenly see the 17-year-old boy beneath the cold, dangerous man. A boy who had been saved by an argument. A boy who had to live with the knowledge that his father had died in his place. "Ever since that day," Isabella continued, her voice barely a whisper, "he has allowed no one to get close to him. No one. He sees connection as a liability, a weapon that can be used against him. Marco knows this. He was looking for a chink in the armor. I saw you, alone, unassuming. I made a choice. It was desperate. But I will not apologize for protecting my son." She turned and left without another word. Avery was alone again with Dante. He still had not moved. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She now understood the source of his coldness, the reason for his isolation. It was not a choice. It was a scar, a deep internal wound that had never healed. Her fear of him was still present, a cold knot in her stomach. But now it was joined by something else, something she was terrified to name. It was a flicker of understanding, a dangerous, unwelcome sliver of empathy for the monster who held her captive. Days bled into a strange, suffocating routine. Avery woke up in her silent room, drank coffee in the cavernous kitchen with a man who was her captor, and spent her days reading books from a well-stocked but impersonal library in his office. She was a ghost in his life, a silent witness to his world. Men with hard eyes and expensive suits would come and go, meeting with Dante in his office for hushed, intense conversations. She learned to make herself small, to disappear into the background. She was Amelia, the fiancée, a pretty, docile ornament. It was a role that chafed, but she played it with a quiet determination, knowing her survival depended on it. Dante rarely spoke to her beyond curt, necessary instructions. But she watched him. She saw the way he commanded a room with a single quiet word. She saw the weight of the responsibility he carried, the constant, humming tension in his shoulders that never fully eased, even late at night when he thought he was alone. He was a man living in a state of perpetual warfare. One evening, she was in his office, looking for a new book to read. He was out, a rare occurrence. She ran her fingers along the spines of the leather-bound classics, her mind a million miles away. Her eyes fell on a large, antique globe in the corner of the room. On impulse, she spun it, watching the countries blur. As it slowed, she noticed a small, almost invisible seam near the equator. Curious, she ran a fingernail along it. A section of the globe clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was not a weapon or a ledger. It was a small, worn, leather-bound journal and a single, faded photograph. Her heart pounded as she picked up the photo. It was of a much younger Dante, perhaps 16 or 17. His arm slung around an older man who shared his dark eyes and the same unsmiling set to his mouth. His father. They were standing in front of an old, ivy-covered building, and for the first time, Avery saw a genuine, unguarded expression on Dante's face. It was not a smile, but it was close. It was a look of pure, uncomplicated admiration. Her hands trembled as she opened the journal. The handwriting was Dante's, the script of a younger man, less controlled than his current signature. It was not a diary of emotions, but a log. Dates, names, locations. It was a detailed accounting of his father's business dealings, his allies, his enemies. It was the work of a boy trying desperately to understand his father's world. The last entry was dated the day before his father's death. It detailed a planned meeting with a new shipping contact in the Red Hook docks. A man his father was unsure about. A man named Sal Marconi. The entry ended with a single, chilling sentence. Rinaldi vouched for him.
Marco Rinaldi.
The name leaped off the page. This was not a new rivalry. It was an old one. Marco had been there from the beginning. He had vouched for the man who was likely involved in his father's murder. A cold dread washed over her. This was not just about territory or power. For Dante, this was about revenge. She heard the sound of the elevator arriving. Panic seized her. She quickly put the journal and the photograph back, closing the globe, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could have taken the journal. It was proof. It was leverage she could use to bargain for her freedom, to expose him to the authorities. It was a weapon. Dante walked into the office, his tie loosened, his expression weary. He stopped when he saw her standing by the globe, her face pale. His eyes narrowed, instantly suspicious. He knew she had found something. The air was thick with tension. He walked slowly towards her, his gaze never leaving her face. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. She could have lied. She could have feigned ignorance. But in that moment, looking at the man who carried the weight of his father's death, she made a choice. She was not a pawn. She was not a victim. She was a player in this game now, whether she wanted to be or not. And she had just chosen a side. "Rinaldi," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "It was always him, wasn't it? He was involved in your father's death." The confession hung in the air between them. It was a truth he had likely never spoken aloud to anyone. His cold composure finally broke. She saw a flicker of raw, unguarded pain in his eyes, a glimpse of the wounded boy he kept buried so deep inside. He did not confirm it. He did not have to. The look on his face was answer enough. He had expected her to run, to use his secrets against him. He did not expect her to see his oldest wound and simply name it. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. She had stayed when she could have run. She had offered him a piece of his own past instead of using it as a weapon. Therefore, for the first time, Dante Vescovi looked at the woman in his home and saw not a liability, but an ally. The aftermath of her discovery was a profound, unsettling silence. Dante did not speak of his father again, but the wall of ice between them had a hairline crack in it. He started looking at her differently, his gaze lingering for a second too long. Sometimes, when he was on the phone, his voice low and lethal as he gave orders, his eyes would find hers across the room, and there was a new awareness in them. He was no longer just seeing a problem to be managed. He was seeing a person who knew his deepest secret. A week later, he told her they were going out. Not to a clandestine meeting, but to dinner. "You are my fiancée," he stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We are expected to be seen together." It was another performance, but this one felt different. He took her to a small, impossibly exclusive restaurant in the village, a place with no sign on the door. The moment they walked in, a hush fell over the room. The owner, a balding man with worried eyes, rushed over to greet them, bowing his head slightly to Dante. "Don Vescovi, your table is ready." Don. The title settled over Dante like a shroud, a formal acknowledgement of his power. This was not a date. It was a display. He was putting his new, most valuable asset on display for his world to see. Avery played her part, smiling and letting him hold her hand across the table. The food was exquisite, but she could barely taste it. She was acutely aware of the other diners, the powerful men and their beautiful, silent wives who watched them with furtive glances. This was Dante's court, and she was the new consort. As they were leaving, stepping out into the cool night air, it happened. A dark van screeched to a halt beside them. Two men in ski masks jumped out, moving with brutal efficiency. One grabbed Avery, his hand clamping over her mouth. The other went for Dante. Time seemed to slow down. Avery reacted on pure instinct. She stomped her heel down hard on her attacker's instep, eliciting a grunt of pain. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second, and it was all Dante needed. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He did not fight like a brawler. He moved like a surgeon, his actions precise, economical, and utterly lethal. There was a sickening crack as he disabled the man who had lunged for him. He then turned to Avery's attacker. There was no rage on his face, only a cold, absolute focus. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it at an unnatural angle. A scream was cut short as Dante drove his other hand into the man's throat. The man collapsed, gagging. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The street was suddenly silent except for the gurgling sound from the man on the pavement. Dante's driver was there, gun drawn, but the threat was already neutralized. Dante's chest was heaving slightly, the only sign of his exertion. His eyes were black with adrenaline. He reached for Avery, his hands checking her for injuries, his touch frantic, almost rough. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. She shook her head, unable to speak. She had just seen him move through violence like it was his native language. She had seen him kill a man or come close to it to protect her. The horror of it warred with a terrifying primal thrill. He had shielded her, fought for her. His hand was on her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek, his eyes boring into hers. The line between captor and protector blurred into nothing. "Get in the car," he ordered, his voice still tight. As his driver bundled them into the back of the sedan, Avery looked back at the two crumpled forms on the sidewalk. She had seen Dante's true nature, the violence that was always simmering just beneath the surface. Most people would have been repulsed. Most people would have run screaming. But as the car sped away, leaving the carnage behind, Avery felt a strange, dark sense of belonging. She had crossed a line tonight. She had not just witnessed his world. She had participated in it. She had fought back, and he had killed for her. The silence in the car on the way back to the penthouse was heavier than ever before. Avery could still feel the phantom grip of the attacker's hand, still see the terrifying speed with which Dante had moved. He sat beside her, staring out the window, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. The violence had dissipated, leaving behind a cold, simmering rage. When they arrived back in the silent apartment, he went straight to the bar and poured a drink, downing it in one swallow. "That was Marco," he said, his back to her. It was not a question. "I know," she whispered. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and haunted. "This is my fault. I put you in this position. I brought you into this." For the first time since she had met him, he looked vulnerable. Not weak, but as if the armor had been stripped away, revealing the raw guilt beneath. The sight of it moved her in a way she did not expect. "Your mother put me in this position," she corrected him gently. "You are just trying to keep me alive." His eyes locked on hers. A complex storm of emotions passed through them. Anger, guilt, and something else. Something deeper and more dangerous. "You should have run," he said, his voice rough. "Back at the wedding, you should have screamed for security. You should have run." "I couldn't," she admitted, the truth of it surprising even herself. "Your mother." She looked terrified. "And then you walked in and I knew. I knew it was real." He walked towards her, stopping just a foot away. The space between them was electric, charged with the adrenaline of the attack and the weight of their unspoken confessions. "You are not safe with me, Amelia," he said, using the fake name like a shield, a reminder of the lie that bound them. "My name is Avery," she said softly, reclaiming her own identity. "And I don't think I'd be safer anywhere else right now." That was the confession. Not a declaration of love, but something far more potent. It was an acknowledgement of their reality, an acceptance of the danger and a choice to face it with him. The air grew thick, the silence stretching until it was a tangible thing. He raised a hand, as if to touch her face, but let it drop. The aborted gesture was more intimate than any touch. The next day, 2 men in dark suits arrived at the penthouse. They were quiet, professional, and their faces were grim. They were FBI agents. They wanted to speak to Miss Avery Collins. Her real name. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about the incident outside the restaurant, describing the attackers and Dante's brutal response. But the tip had been twisted. It painted Avery not as a victim, but as a willing participant in an organized crime hit. The agents separated them, taking Avery into the office while Dante was made to wait in the living room, flanked by another agent. The lead agent, a man named Harris, had cold, intelligent eyes. He laid out photographs of known associates of Marco Rinaldi. "Do you know these men?" he asked. "They were the men from last night." Avery's mind raced. If she told the truth, Dante would be charged with assault, possibly murder. The full weight of the federal government would come down on him, and Marco would win. She would be put into witness protection, her life erased for her own safety. But Dante would be gone. If she lied, she would be crossing a line from which there was no return. She would be committing a federal crime. She would be choosing his world over the one she had left behind. She looked at the agent, her expression a careful mask of polite confusion. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I've never seen them before in my life." "Miss Collins," Agent Harris said, leaning forward. "We have a witness who says these men attacked you and your associate, Mr. Vescovi, and that he responded with extreme prejudice." "We were at dinner," Avery said calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It was a lovely evening. We went straight home afterwards. No one attacked us. Your witness must be mistaken." She held his gaze, her heart pounding a frantic, silent rhythm against her ribs. She was lying to a federal agent. She was providing a false alibi for a mafia boss. She was no longer a victim or a pawn. She was an accessory. She had made a morally gray choice, a choice that bound her to Dante in a way that no fake engagement ever could. The agent stared at her for a long time, his eyes searching for any crack in her story. He found none. He eventually gathered his photos and left, his frustration palpable. When the door closed behind the agents, Dante was there, watching her from the doorway of the office. He had heard everything. He knew what she had done for him. The lie was a bridge she had built between them, over a chasm of law and morality, and she had just willingly walked across it, leaving her old life behind on the other side for good. The immediate aftermath of her lie was a new kind of tension. Dante did not thank her. He did not have to. His gratitude was in the way he watched her now, a silent, intense regard that made her skin hum. He would find her reading in the living room and just stand there, his presence a heavy, protective weight. He started talking to her, not just giving orders. He would tell her about his day, not the violent specifics, but the strategic maneuvering, the betrayals he had anticipated, the loyalties he had rewarded. He was showing her the machinery of his empire, trusting her with the knowledge. The lie she had told the FBI, however, had a cost she had not anticipated. It had not made the feds go away. It had made them more interested. They had a witness, and now they had a material witness who was lying to them. She was no longer a potential victim in their eyes. She was an obstruction, player. They put a tail on her, or rather, on Dante's car whenever she was in it. They were building a case, and she was now a part of it. The cage had just gotten smaller. One afternoon, Dante's mother arrived, unannounced. Isabella looked older, the strain of the past few weeks etched into the fine lines around her eyes. She dismissed Dante with a wave of her hand and sat opposite Avery. "He is different with you here," she said, her voice soft. "I have not seen him this unguarded since before his father died." "He's under a lot of pressure," Avery said, deflecting. It is more than that, Isabella insisted. He trusts you. Dante does not trust anyone, she sighed. A sound of profound weariness. I created this situation. I put you in his path. I had hoped you would be a temporary shield. I did not expect you to become an anchor. She looked at Avery. Her dark eyes filled with a fierce, maternal warning. Be careful, child. To love a man like my son is to consent to be ruined. He will protect you with his life. But his life is a fire that burns everything it touches. Her words lingered long after she had gone. A chilling prophecy. That night, Avery could not sleep. She went to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Dante standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the sleeping city. He had not heard her approach. In the faint glow of the city lights, his face was etched with a deep, profound loneliness. He looked like a king ruling over a kingdom of ghosts. I can't go back, can I? She said, her voice quiet in the vast, silent room. He turned slowly. He did not pretend to misunderstand. No, he said. Even if we deal with Marco, even if the feds go away. You know too much. You have seen too much. You lied for me. In their eyes, you are a part of this now. There is no going back to the life you had. It was the truth she already knew, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. The life of Avery Collins, art history student, was over. She was Amelia, the woman who stood beside Dante Vescovi. Her past was a foreign country she could never visit again. A profound sadness washed over her, a grief for the simple, uncomplicated person she used to be. Tears pricked her eyes, and she fought them back, refusing to cry in front of him. He saw it anyway. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped in front of her. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. His touch was feather-light, shockingly tender. I never wanted this for you, he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. I know, she said, her own voice thick. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The space between them crackled, the air thick with everything they had been through. The fake engagement, the attack, the lie. It all led to this moment, in the dead of night, with the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. He lowered his head, and she tilted her face up to meet him. His lips were firm, hesitant at first, then deepening with a desperate, possessive hunger. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was the taste of danger and cedar and expensive whiskey. It was the culmination of every shared risk, every unspoken confession. It was a seal on a pact she had made the moment she lied for him. In that kiss, she was not his captive. She was his equal, and she was just as lost as he was.